I can't think of anything more important than to give young people a flying start on life in a complicated time in history. We don't know much about the future, but we know it's going to be fast changing. We know it's going to be demanding. We know it's going to be full of risk and challenge and excitement and pitfalls. So education should be looking beyond the grades and tests, beyond university entrance, to the kinds of mindsets, the kinds of mental toolbox that young people have when they leave school, whether they got good results or not, whether they're going to be a professor or a brain surgeon or a short order chef or a care worker. Everybody is going to need a flexible, strong, supple mind for dealing with challenge when it arises.
Guy Claxton is a cognitive scientist by training and writer of over 30 books on psychology and education. He has a double first in natural sciences from Cambridge and a doctorate in experimental psychology from Oxford. His research to date reflects his fascination with learning, how people can get better at it, and his interest in what he calls non-intellectual forms of intelligence. In education, he's best known for the concept of learning power, a collection of skills and attitudes that underpin our ability to tackle complex matters with confidence, capability, and relish. Guy's had a fruitful career. In addition to working with hundreds of schools and thousands of teachers around the world, he's worked with dancers and choreographers at the Siobhan Davies Studio and at the Barbican Theatre, participated in Dream a Dream's Change the Script conference in India, ran workshops for youth coaches at the Premier League football academies across the UK, lectured at Buddhism centres, spoken at psychotherapy conferences in Australia, delivered a TED Talk in Sweden, and ran a national conference for school students on what's the point of school. Guy still travels the world giving talks and running workshops, and occasionally lectures as a visiting professor back at King's College London. In his latest book series, The Learning Power Approach, Guy offers educators a way of teaching that delivers good academic results while simultaneously turbocharging students' independence, initiative, and love for learning. Having been on the receiving end of this approach to learning while I was at school myself, I went to speak to Guy at his home in Sussex to find out more about learning power.
Here we are. This is the book factory. It's what I spend a large part of my life, or have spent a large part of my life doing. These are all books on intelligence. This is the unconscious, history of psychology. This is from my Buddhist days, or my sort of spirituality days. So these books about Buddhism.
I noticed the Buddha on the way in.
Yes. That's a well spotted trend in my life. So, but also some books on Christianity, Hinduism, other kinds of spirituality. This is my very first education book, this one.
Okay.
Yeah, it's called The Little Ed Book. There's someone produced, Chairman Mao in China produced something called his Little Red Book. So I produced The Little Ed Book, which was a book for trainee teachers about the kinds of personal issues and anxieties that they were dealing with. And the latest down here, the latest books, the Learning Power books, the general one, and then one for primary school teachers, and then one for secondary school teachers, and there's another one to come which I'm working on at the moment.
Brilliant. So, Guy, tell me, what is the Learning Power Approach?
First of all, we need to know what learning power is. Learning power is what makes someone good at dealing with things that are complicated, difficult, or strange. Second thing, learning power is learnable. We can get better at dealing with those kinds of things. And that's what learning is. Learning is dealing with difficult things. Third, we know that schools can help people get better at dealing with difficult things, and they can do it alongside the history and the maths and the science and the getting the grades. And fourth, learning power is one of the most fundamental assets in life, particularly life in a complicated time.
So often young people leave school with more anxieties than they started with. We want them to leave confident and capable, yet this is the case. What's going on?
Well, there seems like a strange, or almost like a perversion in education that youngsters come out of school not more adventurous, more imaginative, more creative, more collaborative, more reflective, but less of all of those things. As a result of 12 years in school, they may have some good grades, or they may not, but either way, they can come out of school lacking resilience and resourcefulness and independence of thought and the ability to think on their feet. So they find themselves ill-prepared, even if they've got 3 or 4 A's at A-level, ill-prepared to deal with the flow of challenges and demands that is going to come at them in their lives, certainly at university, certainly when they go on into the workplace, and throughout the whole of their lives. What could be more important than the ability to rise to a challenge? Now, in that kind of learning, whether it's in sports or a musical instrument or elsewhere, as you're learning, you need to be conscious of what you're doing. You need to be able to name, to understand, to bring your attention to the different aspects of what you're doing. And the same is true of learning itself. So in the learning power approach, one of the things that is most central is helping young people develop a vocabulary with which they can think and talk and reflect about the process of learning, about what's going on, about how they feel, and also about themselves as people who are growing in their capacity to be good learners. It's very strange that education, which is supposed to be all about learning, has not, until very recently, had such a good vocabulary. Now we do, and it makes an enormous difference.
And I suppose what you're saying as a teacher when you're using this vocabulary in the classroom is that you value these things.
There are many aspects to the things that a teacher can do to create what I think of as a sort of powerful and effective incubator in their classroom, which is to do with the culture that they create through a whole lot of specific little actions that we have identified. So it's not at all nebulous. And as you adjust the way you talk, for example, what you notice and comment on about the way students are behaving in the classroom, not whether they're well behaved or badly behaved, but how are they behaving as learners? Just by imbuing the environment with those kinds of subtle linguistic messages, you can make a change.
Yeah, and imbuing is a really good word, because in my experience, I remember that the teachers that had fully embedded this stuff into their sessions understood that it couldn't be cultivated in a sort of like an abstract sense. You couldn't have a lesson on creativity. You know, it was part of a deeper learning process. And those teachers who perhaps hadn't quite got that, it bordered on being superficial or gimmicky. How do we make sure that, you know, as school leaders, for example, how do they make sure that that doesn't happen?
I think we've been learning a lot about the craft of learning over the last 30 or 40 years, which is, and I've been in this game as an academic for longer than that. And we've been learning what works and what doesn't work. And what doesn't work is kind of pasting things on the top, over the top, a few posters here or there, or some little trick or technique here. And actually what we've now discovered is that you have to get down to the cultural feel. It's almost like an undertow or a current in the classroom that teachers can create, which is either pulling their students in the direction of becoming more passive and docile and compliant and timid, or drawing them in the direction of becoming more independent, more thoughtful, more imaginative, more experimental, more resourceful. That's the shift that teachers can make. And when they do that, it's extremely powerful. But you have to get to that level. Like, for example, growth mindset is a very fashionable notion at the moment. And you can tell when people haven't got it right because they say we're doing growth mindset. And growth mindset isn't something you do, it's something that emerges when you get the culture right. And when the learning power approach, I think, gets us down to the level that we need to get to, the level of detail to create that culture, that incubator that will stand young people in the good stead for the rest of their lives.
So what's crucial to learn about the learning process?
Well, one of the key things, and a lot of people are talking about this, it's very simple and very straightforward, is the realization that when you make mistakes, it doesn't mean you're stupid, it means you're learning. So to detoxify the notion of mistakes in the classroom is absolutely critical. There are some children in classrooms still who think that somehow or other if they make a mistake, even a simple mistake, they've let themselves down, it's a shameful thing, or they've let their family down, or they shouldn't, or they've been revealed as not as bright as they thought they were, because they have this silly idea that if you're a bright student or a successful student, you get everything right first time. Always. Preferably without effort. And that's such a silly notion, because my life isn't like that. I'm sure your life isn't like that. We get better, we learn through trial and error, through making mistakes, through revising, through having a look at what we've done, thinking about how to improve it. So when you're in learning mode, the most important thing is to realize that mistakes are inevitable, normal, and informational. And whatever teachers can do, and there's lots of little things they can do, to shift the mood from seeing mistakes as a personal failure to seeing mistakes as kind of cognitively part and parcel of the learning process.
What does the science actually suggest about this way of learning?
The crucial thing, the crucial shift really in our understanding, when I say our, I mean psychologists, experimental psychologists, cognitive scientists like myself, over the last 20 or 30 years, has been a shift from seeing the mind more or less in terms of a small number of static capacities, like intelligence, for example, to seeing it more as a constellation of learnable habits. Habits, beliefs, assumptions, interests, all of those together go to make up how intelligently you act when you're confronted with something difficult or complicated. What the research has been revealing, both our own and many other groups around the world that comprise the learning power approach, is that this approach is applicable and valuable to young people, and indeed not only young people, actually there's a lot of interest from the business world, of all different kinds and shapes and sizes and ages. We started with primary school children. Very quickly we discovered that these ideas were equally applicable to secondary, equally applicable to early years, to children in nurseries. Recently I've been working with some special schools and have been discovering how many people are applying these kinds of ideas to children on the autistic spectrum, for example. Some people think that this is only for high-achieving children, only children who are articulate enough or self-aware enough to be able to benefit from them. They do benefit, but actually the research shows that the major benefit, disproportionately large benefit, is for children who are low achievers and or from low-income backgrounds. So we win in terms of the examination results, but more importantly, we win in terms of their confidence, their capacity, and their appetite for learning throughout their lives.
I know that you tell this story about some students from Chile.
Yes, one of Carol Dweck's recent experiments, which I think is enormously important, looked at the whole cohort of Year 10 students across Chile, 164,000 14-year-olds, gathered all kinds of demographic data about them: rich, poor, urban, rural, high-achieving, low-achieving, highly educated parents, lower, and so on. Looked at these youngsters' performance in school and then gave them a growth mindset questionnaire. Basically questions like, do you think your ability is expandable or do you think it's fixed? What they discovered was that a lot of children from low-income backgrounds tend to have what we call a fixed mindset. That is, they give up quickly in the face of difficulty. However, there is a sizable minority of children from those backgrounds, often from very, very poor backgrounds, who have a growth mindset, who believe in their capacity to master things, to figure things out for themselves. When you look at their performance in school, their performance is, and I'm quoting Carol Dweck herself now, indistinguishable from that of students from much, much, much wealthier backgrounds. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't need to worry about issues of social injustice or economic inequity in our societies. What it does mean is that any teacher on Monday morning can find a way of buffering the effects of poverty very powerfully and helping those children move out of poverty into a more fulfilling life. One little study that I supervised showed that year 2 children, six-year-old children, the quality of their creative writing reliably goes up when you deliberately talk to them, give them some techniques for how to calm their minds. There's one little girl in a classroom said to me when I said, what's that over there, that corner? It's called the creativity cave. What's that for? She said it's where when you want to do something creative like write a poem or draw a picture, she said you can just go into the cave and be quiet for a few minutes so you can let your brain cool down a bit so that it will bubble up with new ideas. Now, Ganesha, a 6-year-old, was being asked about the learning power approach in her school. She used to be a bright but brittle little girl. In other words, if she couldn't do something quickly, she wouldn't try. She'd just give up. But when she was asked, after having had a few years of building learning power, she said, the first thing she said was, when something's hard, you don't want to say, oh, it's too hard, I'll just skip it, which is exactly what she used to do. She said, because the point is, if you don't try, you'll never get anywhere. And then she said, because when you're grown up, you'll still come to things that you can't do, and you can't skip them then. And I thought that was a very nice example of a 6-year-old who'd got it. She understood the learning power approach. She knew that she was going to school not only to shape her letters and to learn her sums, but to get ready for life, to have a useful, valuable habit built into her own mind. And that's what it's all about.
In my experience, this approach to learning at its best has shaped the person that I am today, the student that I am today, in the quest for educators to provide meaningful and relevant education. How does the learning power approach help realise this ambition?
I can't think of anything more important than, as a job for education, than to give young people a flying start on life in a complicated time in history. We don't know much about the future, but we know it's going to be fast changing, we know it's going to be demanding, we know it's going to be full of risk and challenge and excitement and pitfalls. So education should be looking beyond the grades and tests, beyond university entrance, to the kinds of mindsets, the kinds of mental toolbox that young people have when they leave school, whether they got good results or not, whether they're going to be a professor or a brain surgeon or a short order chef or a care worker. Everybody is going to need a flexible, strong, supple mind for dealing with challenge when it arises. And we have now found that in the course of the normal business of schooling, if we tweak our teaching a little bit, we can deliver that crock of gold to all young people, whatever their backgrounds, wherever they are in the world. And that, for me, is tremendously exciting.
Thank you, Guy.